Welcome to Revenge with Nora. My stepmother looked me in the eye at my father's birthday dinner and told me, flat out, that I would never truly be part of this family. I was 15 years old, and if you think you already know how this story ends, I promise you, you don't. My name is Reese Calloway. I'm 28. I work as a nurse practitioner in Nashville, Tennessee, and for most of my life, I believed that if I just tried hard enough, smiled wide enough, apologized fast enough, I could earn a seat at a table that was never actually mine to sit at. Let me explain what I mean. My parents divorced when I was 4. It wasn't dramatic, at least not on the surface. My father moved on quickly. Within 2 years, he had remarried a woman named Sandra, and Sandra came with opinions about everything, especially about me. She had 2 daughters of her own from a previous relationship, girls who were polished and quiet and did exactly what they were told. Then, there was me. Loud, curious, always asking questions nobody wanted to answer. Sandra made it clear from the very beginning that I was a complication she had not signed up for. My father loved me. I want to believe that. But love, I learned early, can be a passive thing. It can sit quietly in the corner of a room while someone else does all the damage. By the time I was in middle school, the rules had calcified. Holiday gatherings were for Sandra's daughters. Vacations were planned around their schedules. Family photos on the mantle did not include me. When I'd show up at my father's house for my every other weekend visit, I'd sleep on a pull-out couch in what Sandra called the craft room, while my stepsisters had bedrooms decorated with their names on the doors in wooden block letters. Nobody ever said, "You don't belong here." They didn't have to. There was always a reason I wasn't included. Always a polite excuse dressed up in careful language. "We thought you'd be tired. We figured you had plans. Your mother probably wanted you that weekend." The excuses changed. The exclusion never did. When my older stepsister got engaged, the whole family flew to Charleston for an engagement party. I was not invited. My father called 2 days before to let me know, almost as an afterthought. "It'll be a small thing," he said, "just close family." I remember holding the phone and understanding, for the first time with complete clarity, that close family did not include me. I cried for about 45 minutes. Then I drove myself to work, took care of my patients, and added it to the long, quiet list of things I was learning to carry alone. When I moved to Nashville at 23 for my graduate program, something shifted. For the first time in my life, nobody knew my backstory. Nobody looked at me like I was someone else's inconvenient leftover. I found an apartment with purple walls that I refused to repaint. I found a running group on Tuesday mornings. I found colleagues who stayed late and shared bad vending machine coffee and laughed about nothing in particular. And then I found Jordan. He was a high school history teacher who read too much and cooked elaborate Sunday dinners and never once made me feel like I needed to earn his attention. On our 3rd date, he asked me what made me feel most like myself. I didn't have an answer ready. Nobody had ever asked me that before. I sat there for a long moment, and he just waited, patient and unhurried, like my answer actually mattered. I think I started falling in love with him in that silence. 2 years later, he proposed in the kitchen of our apartment while we were making pasta from scratch, flour on both our hands, and I said yes before he had even gotten down on one knee properly. We laughed about that for weeks afterward. When we started planning the wedding, I felt a familiar coldness move through me. Not about Jordan. About the list, the guest list, specifically the question of whether to put names on it that had never once put my name on anything. I went back and forth for longer than I want to admit. Jordan never pushed. He'd listen when I wanted to talk about it, and he'd let silence do its work when I didn't. But I could see it in the way he looked at me sometimes, that quiet worry. Not for himself, for me. One evening, I sat at the kitchen table with a glass of wine and a blank page, and I wrote down every family event I had not been invited to in the last 20 years. My stepsister's engagement party, both of my stepsister's graduations, a family reunion in Asheville when I was 19 that I only found out about because someone posted photos on Facebook, my father's 50th birthday dinner, Christmas every single year until I stopped asking. I filled half the page. Then I made my decision. We sent no invitations to my father's side. Not to him, not to Sandra, not to my stepsisters, not to my aunt on that side who had always watched the exclusion happen and never once said a word. The wedding would be 40 people under string lights in a garden outside of Nashville, people who had actually shown up for us. That was the only requirement. I exhaled for the first time in months. The quiet lasted about 9 days. My stepsister was the one who broke it. She sent a voice message through Instagram of all places, the words fast and sharp and barely contained. "Reese, we heard about the wedding. Are you seriously not inviting Dad? Do you know how this makes the family look? Call me back." I listened to it twice. Then I set my phone face down on the counter and finished making dinner. But that night, I lay awake, and the old familiar dread came crawling back. The one that used to live in my chest every time I packed a bag for my father's house. The one that asked, over and over, what if you're the problem? What if you've always been too sensitive? What if you owe them something just for being alive? Jordan found me sitting up at 2 a.m, scrolling through nothing on my phone. He didn't ask for an explanation. He just sat down next to me and said, quietly, "You are not asking for too much by wanting people in your corner on your wedding day." I put my phone down. The next morning, I opened my father's text message. It was longer than anything he had sent me in years. "Reese, Sandra and I are hurt. You are part of this family whether you believe it or not. A wedding is a chance for healing. Don't do something you'll regret. We deserve to be there." I read the phrase "we deserve to be there" 3 separate times. There was a bitter kind of clarity in it. Not hurt, not longing, just recognition. They had never once shown up for me. Not in 30 years. And the moment I had something they wanted to attend, suddenly, I was family again. Suddenly, the door they had spent 2 decades slowly closing on me was supposed to swing wide open on their schedule. I did not reply. But that afternoon, my phone became a slow disaster. My aunt sent a long email about the importance of forgiveness. My stepsister called twice from a blocked number. And then Sandra herself sent a text that I read once and will never forget. "Your father has given you more than you know. Don't embarrass him by making this a public thing. Don't make this a public thing." I screenshot it, saved it to a folder I labeled, simply, receipts. That night, Jordan found me at the dining table, surrounded by my phone and a cold cup of tea, and a feeling I couldn't quite name. He sat across from me. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That they don't want to come to my wedding. They want to be seen at my wedding. It's completely different." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, I think you're right." I looked at him. "I think I need to write something. Before the wedding. Something they'll receive that morning." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Okay. What do you want to say?" "Just the truth," I said. "No anger, no defense. Just exactly what happened, and exactly what this is." He nodded again. "Then do it." I opened my laptop and I wrote a letter. Calm, precise, 1 page. I addressed it to my father. I told him that I had spent my entire childhood being quietly reminded that I was a secondary concern, that I had not been invited to a single major family event in over 15 years, that this wedding was not a punishment and it was not a statement. It was simply a room full of people who had chosen to show up for me, and I was choosing the same for them. I told him I forgave him for the craft room couch. I forgave him for Charleston. I forgave him for 50 birthday dinners I heard about secondhand. But forgiveness, I wrote, is something I give myself. It does not come with a guest pass. I scheduled the email for 6:30 on the morning of our wedding. Then, I closed the laptop and slept better than I had in weeks. The morning of the wedding, I woke up to light coming through the curtains and the sound of Jordan in the kitchen, and for about 30 seconds the world was completely still and perfect. Then my phone started. Missed calls from my father. A voicemail from Sandra that I didn't open. A long text from my stepsister that began with the words, "You have really done it now." I set the phone on the bathroom counter and looked at my reflection and said out loud, "You don't have to fix anything today." My best friend Danny came over to help me with my hair, and she took one look at my face and said, "Whatever they're saying, don't read it. Today is not for them." I put the phone in my bag. The ceremony was everything I had never known I was allowed to want. 40 people, string lights, Jordan crying before I even reached the end of the aisle. My colleague Marcus giving a toast that made everyone laugh too hard. Danny dancing like no one was watching. which meant everyone was watching. I felt for the first time in my life like the center of something warm that actually wanted me there. Then Donnie's expression changed. We were halfway through dinner when she leaned over and touched my arm. Her voice was careful. "Reese, your stepsister posted something." My stomach dropped. I took Danny's phone. It was a photo of me from years ago, some awkward family Christmas I barely remembered, captioned, "Praying for healing in our family today. Some people choose bitterness. We choose love." The comments were already filling up. Friends of Sandra's, church acquaintances, a cousin who hadn't spoken to me in 6 years, suddenly devastated on behalf of the family. Jordan saw my face and moved his chair closer. "Don't let them do this tonight," he said quietly. I handed Danny back her phone. "You're right," I said. "Tonight is ours." But I already knew what I was going to do in the morning. The day after our wedding, the notifications were still running. Someone had shared the post to a local community Facebook group, the kind that usually discusses lost dogs and HOA complaints. Suddenly, strangers were weighing in on my family drama with the confidence of people who had never met any of us. The phrases "ungrateful daughter" and "family torn apart" kept appearing. Someone had tagged a local lifestyle blogger who covered feel-good community stories. I sat in our kitchen in a borrowed robe and read through it all and felt something harden in a way that had nothing to do with anger. It was more like decision. I called my friend Priya. She did communications work for a mid-size nonprofit and had spent years managing exactly this kind of public narrative problem. I described what was happening, and she went quiet for a moment. "Classic," she said. "They've framed you as the aggressor before you could frame anything at all. Send me the post and the comments." By early afternoon, she called back. "That blogger who got tagged? She covers real human interest stories, the messy ones. I've worked with her before. She's fair. If you want, I can make an introduction. But Reese, you'll need documentation." I had the folder. I had the screenshots of 15 years' worth of being excluded. The text from Sandra warning me not to make it public. The Instagram voice message from my stepsister. A photo of the craft room pull-out couch I had slept on for years, which I'd taken on a phone years ago for reasons I couldn't even explain at the time, as though some part of me had always known I might one day need it. I sent everything to Priya. While she worked, I sat on our back porch with Jordan and told him everything I was doing. He listened without interrupting. When I was done, he said, "This isn't revenge." "I know," I said. "It's just the other side of the story finally getting told." "Yeah, exactly that." The next morning, the blogger reached out directly. She had reviewed everything Priya sent. She was careful and professional, and she asked me only one question before she moved forward. "What do you want people to understand?" I thought about it for a long time. Not that my family is bad, just that families can quietly exclude someone for 30 years and then act wounded when that person stops arranging herself around their comfort. She published the follow-up piece that evening. It included the documented timeline, the screenshots, my own words, only what I chose to share. The comments on my stepsister's original post began to shift almost immediately. People who had been piling on with sympathy for my family started reading between the lines. A few people who knew our family from years back started sharing their own quiet observations. By the next morning, my stepsister had deleted the post entirely. I was making coffee when my father called. I let it ring to voicemail. His message was short and tight with something I recognized as controlled fury. "Reese, you didn't have to go this far. This is not what families do to each other." I listened to it twice. Not because it hurt, because I noticed, for the first time, that it didn't. Then I called my attorney. Her name was Diane. She was sharp and unhurried and had helped me once before, years ago, when Sandra had spread a story to mutual acquaintances that I had stolen money from my father, a lie so specific and so casually delivered that it had taken me months to untangle. Diane had written a letter then that had stopped it cold. I explained what was happening now, the coordinated posts, the community group, the photos shared without my consent, the ongoing contact after I had made my wishes clear. "This crosses into harassment territory," she said, "and the photo use without consent, depending on context, is actionable. Let me draft something." Within the afternoon, she had prepared a cease and desist notice directed at my father, Sandra, and my stepsister. It outlined specifically what had occurred, what could not continue, and what the legal consequences would be if it did. She sent it electronically to all three. 2 hours later, I received a single text from my stepsister. It said, "You really are something else." I read it, put my phone in a drawer, and went to help Jordan pick up the wedding photos from the photographer. The weeks that followed were quiet, in the way I had always imagined quiet could be, but never actually trusted. The posts stopped. The calls stopped. My aunt sent one final email that said she hoped we could move forward someday, which I read as a closing statement rather than a real invitation, so I filed it away and moved on. I heard through a cousin I was still close with that Sandra had gone private on all her social media, that my father had stopped talking about it at the dinner table, that my stepsister, who had started the whole thing, had apparently told people that I had overreacted, which was fine. People who hadn't been in the craft room with me didn't need to understand. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after the wedding, I drove back to Knoxville. Not to see anyone, just to return something to its place. I had been carrying a particular weight for years, and I wanted to set it down somewhere specific. I drove past my father's house. It looked exactly as I remembered it. The same shutters, the same careful landscaping Sandra had always maintained for appearances. I didn't stop. I didn't need to. I had already said what I needed to say in that email on that morning before any of it could be twisted into something else. I drove to a park where my mother used to take me when I was small. Before the divorce, before any of it, there was a bench near a duck pond where we used to sit and eat crackers out of a Ziploc bag, and she would ask me what I was thinking about. I sat there for about 20 minutes. I didn't cry. I just sat and felt the difference between the person who had driven away from Knoxville 5 years ago and the person sitting on this bench right now. On the drive home, I called Jordan, just to hear his voice. "You good?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Actually, yeah." When I got back to Nashville, I unpacked the last few boxes from the move to our new place. At the bottom of one of them, buried under winter sweaters, I found a birthday card from my father. It was from 3 years ago. Inside, he had written, "Hope your day is great, love, Dad." No mention of Jordan, no question about my life. Just 7 words that could have been addressed to anyone. I held it for a moment. Then I put it in the recycling bin without drama, without ceremony, without the long goodbye I used to give everything connected to that part of my life. Jordan looked up from unpacking dishes. "What was that?" "Just something I didn't need to keep." He nodded and handed me a mug to put in the cabinet. Some nights, I still wake up at 3 in the morning with the old reflex. The one that wants to count up everything I did wrong, every place I failed to be what they needed, every way I might have tried harder. I let it move through me now without fighting it. Then I listen to the sound of Jordan sleeping, or the rain against the window, or the city being its ordinary self outside, and I remember that I am not the girl on the pull-out couch anymore. I am not the person waiting to find out if she made the invitation list. I am not asking permission to take up space. That is not a small thing. It is, I have decided, the whole thing. A few weeks ago, I ran into one of my old colleagues in a coffee shop, someone who had known me back in my residency days when I was still driving 4 hours home for every family holiday, hoping this time would be different. She asked how married life was treating me. I told her it was good, genuinely good. The kind of good that doesn't need qualifying. She said, "You look different, not bad different. Just like something finally stopped pulling at you." I thought about that on the drive home. She was right. Something had stopped. Not because the family I grew up in had changed, because they hadn't. My father was probably still sitting in the same chair at the same dinner table, and Sandra was probably still hanging photos in which I did not appear. But the thing that had kept me oriented toward all of that, the long, slow lean of someone hoping to be called in from the cold, that was done. I had stopped leaning. When I got home, Jordan had made dinner, and the apartment smelled like garlic and something warm and ours, and I stood in the doorway for just a second before I went in, letting myself feel it. This, the ordinary, beautiful, specific weight of a life I had actually chosen. Sometimes healing is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with an apology from the people who owed you one. It just shows up one evening in a lit apartment with good food on the stove and the realization that you are no longer braced for something to be taken away. I hung up my keys, walked into the kitchen. Jordan handed me a glass of water and asked about my day, and I told him about a patient who had made me laugh, and he told me about a student who had surprised him, and we talked over each other the way people do when they're comfortable and unhurried and home. Later that night, I updated the photo on my nightstand. Not the one from my father's house, the old formal family portrait where I was positioned at the edge of the frame, like an afterthought. I replaced it with one from the wedding. Jordan and me, mid-laugh, slightly out of focus because Danny had taken it while dancing and hadn't quite steadied her hand. It was imperfect and completely real, and every time I looked at it I thought, yes, that is exactly right. I placed it on the nightstand and turned off the light. And for the first time in longer than I could name, I did not dream about locked doors.